the trick they use to control you, Orwell explained. Let's start with a simple question that might haunt you. How do you know the thoughts in your head are really yours? Not just the opinions you've adopted, but the words you use to think, feel, and understand the world. Language is so natural to us that we forget it's also the architecture of our reality. But what if the very words you rely on to express freedom have been crafted to keep you from ever truly understanding it? That's the trick Orwell was trying to show us. Not just in 1984, but in the terrifying beauty of his insight that control doesn't begin with guns or prisons, it begins with words. It begins in the invisible space between your thoughts. And once they control that space, they don't need to control anything else. We think of Orwell as a warning about authoritarianism, and he absolutely was. But most people miss the deeper layer. Orwell wasn't just afraid of dictators, he was afraid of linguistic engineering, the kind that doesn't just censor what you say, but restructures what you can say. Imagine a world where the word freedom has been redefined to mean obedience. Imagine if truth meant loyalty to the ruling class. Would you even know you were being lied to? Could you rebel if you lacked the words to articulate rebellion? That's the genius of Orwell's invention, Newspeak. A language designed to shrink thought, to make certain ideas literally unthinkable, not forbidden impossible. And that's where the real control begins.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Think about your own language. Think of how we say things like collateral damage instead of dead civilians. We say enhanced interrogation instead of torture. We say mental health day instead of I'm overwhelmed and spiritually exhausted. These aren't just semantic quirks, they're masks. They are linguistic cloaks designed to soften the edges of pain, violence, and suppression. Orwell knew that when you change the word, you change the emotional reality attached to it. And if you can control that, you can control people without them even realizing they've been captured. But here's the part that most people miss, and this is where the video truly begins. You are not immune to this. None of us are. Every time we adopt the language of the dominant culture without questioning it, we become complicit in our own manipulation. When you say I'm just being realistic instead of I'm afraid, you're not being honest, you're protecting yourself with a socially acceptable lie. When you say it is what it is, you're not showing wisdom, you're surrendering your agency. And those phrases feel natural because they were given to you. They were seeded into your vocabulary by a society that benefits from your silence, your compliance, your conformity. And so we arrive at the trick. The real trick they use to control you is not brute force, it's internalized language. They don't have to watch you. You watch yourself. You self-censor. You self-regulate. You start saying what's safe, what's expected, what won't rock the boat. And slowly, the lines between your voice and theirs blur until you can't tell the difference. You think you're free because you can speak, but what if your words are already pre-written by a system designed to control your range of thought? Now here's the question that splits the world in two. If you've never questioned the words you use, have you ever truly thought for yourself? Sit with that. Let it sink in. Because if Orwell's vision was right, and I believe it was, then the real battlefield isn't out there. It's inside you. Inside your internal monologue, your inner narrator, the voice that tells you what's okay to think and what's too dangerous. And that voice isn't always yours. Sometimes it's a recycled broadcast. And the only way to reclaim it is to become radically self-aware of your language. This is where we shift from theory to practice. Because if language is the cage, then mastering language is the key. Orwell didn't write in despair, he wrote in warning. And warnings are only useful if we act on them. So how do we begin to deconstruct the invisible architecture that's been quietly shaping our minds since birth? How do we become fluent in our own truth, instead of fluent in the propaganda we've mistaken for common sense? We start by noticing. Every time you say something like "I'm fine," ask yourself, am I really? Or is that just what I've been trained to say to avoid vulnerability? When you label someone crazy, ask, is that an honest reflection or a dismissal of complexity? When you hear phrases like "it's just business," question what's being hidden behind that statement. What suffering is being erased? Because once you start noticing, you can't stop. The illusion begins to crack. The mask begins to slip. And you begin to realize just how deeply the trick goes, not just in politics, not just in media, but in the quiet corners of your own mind. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Which means you have a choice: stay inside the comfort of linguistic illusion, or step into the terrifying beauty of raw, unfiltered thought. Are you willing to question the words you've been living by? The language cage, how they redefine reality before you can resist. Language is not just a tool we use to describe the world, it's the lens through which we perceive the world. Imagine that. Because once you begin to see words not as reflections of reality but as constructors of it, everything changes. And that's the terrifying brilliance behind Orwell's insight. The cage is not built with steel bars or locked doors. It's built with definitions, with redefinitions, with subtle shifts in meaning that happen so gradually, so invisibly, that by the time you realize reality has changed, the revolution is already over and you didn't even know there was a war. Let's take truth. Once, truth meant something fixed, something discoverable, even if it was hard to find. But what happens when truth becomes relative? When it's no longer about what's real, but about what's useful to those in power? Orwell's Ministry of Truth wasn't about discovering truth, it was about manufacturing it. It rewrote the past daily, because if you control the past, you control memory. And if you control memory, you control identity. This isn't fiction anymore. In our world, history is being rewritten in real time, entire events reframed, sanitized, or erased. Words like liberation become code for invasion. Security becomes a mask for surveillance. Peace becomes a justification for endless war. And because the words feel familiar, we don't question them. We absorb them, we repeat them, we become them. Ask yourself this: if they can change the meaning of words, can they change the meaning of your life? What does it mean to be successful? Who decided that? What does it mean to be crazy or normal or productive? These aren't just neutral descriptions. These are loaded, value-laden terms created within a cultural and political framework. And Orwell understood that whoever controls the framework controls the future. Because when you accept someone else's definition of success, you start chasing a life that might not even be yours. You start running toward a finish line that was never meant to serve you. That's the language cage. You're not just trapped in it, you're running in circles within it, thinking you're free. There's a reason Orwell made the destruction of language the centerpiece of his dystopia. The goal of Newspeak was to reduce the range of thought. Think about that. Not just control what people say, but what they can possibly imagine. Words like freedom and justice were being eliminated, not just because they were dangerous, but because if you can't say them, you eventually can't think them. And if you can't think them, you can't want them. That's the end game, a population that no longer needs to be repressed because it's been perfectly conditioned to repress itself. You might think, well, I still have free speech. I can still say what I want. But here's the deeper question: do you still know what you want? Or have your wants been scripted for you through the language of advertising, politics, and culture? When you say you want to be successful, whose version of success are you chasing? When you say you need to be productive, who benefits from that productivity? Even your internal dialogue, the way you talk to yourself about yourself, has been shaped by words you didn't choose. Lazy, weird, too much. These aren't neutral observations. They're inherited judgments, passed down through generations of social conditioning until they feel like personal truth. So what do? How do we escape the language cage? First, we have to become conscious of the words we use, the metaphors we live by, the labels we accept. We have to start interrogating the language that runs on autopilot in our minds. When you call yourself bad for needing rest, ask where that idea came from. When you call someone crazy because they see the world differently, question whether you're defending truth or just protecting your comfort. And when you hear someone use a word like freedom or democracy, don't just nod, ask what they actually mean. Because the truth is, language is fluid, but that's what makes it powerful. If it can be used to control, it can also be used to liberate. You can reclaim your vocabulary. You can rebuild your internal dictionary. You can create a new syntax for your life, one that reflects your actual values, not the ones you were handed. That's the first step toward freedom, not shouting louder, but speaking honestly. And to do that, you have to notice every time you've been handed a word that doesn't fit. Every time you've accepted a definition that diminishes you. Every time you've used someone else's language to describe your own experience. Words are magic. They are the original technology of civilization. And when you reclaim them, you reclaim yourself. You stop being the echo of someone else's agenda. You become the author of your own reality. The thought police within, why you censor yourself without knowing it. Let's not pretend the greatest threats to freedom come from outside anymore. They don't. Orwell understood something most people still don't dare to accept. The most effective form of control isn't physical, it's psychological. It's not about arresting you for saying the wrong thing. It's about making you afraid to think it in the first place. That's the brilliance of the system. That's how deep the trick goes. The real thought police aren't out there monitoring your speech. They're inside you, quietly editing your mind before a word ever leaves your lips. And the worst part, you think you're doing it to be kind, to be safe, to be normal. But what if you're just playing the part they wrote for you? Think back, how many times have you swallowed a thought that felt true because you were afraid of how others would react? How many times have you softened your opinion, dulled your passion, or hidden your questions just to maintain peace or avoid judgment? That's not diplomacy. That's internalized censorship. It's not about being polite, it's about being afraid. And fear is one of the oldest, most reliable tools of control. Not the kind that screams at you, but the kind that whispers, "Don't say that." They won't understand. You'll lose everything. That's the thought police. And they're not wearing uniforms. They're wearing your face. Orwell's genius wasn't in creating a terrifying external regime. His genius was in predicting that the regime would move inward, is that people would become so conditioned, so thoroughly trained, that they would no longer need to be told what not to say. They would do it instinctively, automatically, even proudly. They would call it being respectful, or staying in your lane, or not making waves. And that's the moment when the system wins, when you become your own jailer and you think it's a moral victory. Now ask yourself this: what thoughts have you stopped thinking because they made you uncomfortable? What questions have you stopped asking because you knew they would isolate you? And most dangerously, what truths have you buried so deep that you can't even tell if they were ever yours to begin with? These are not easy questions, but if you can't face them, you'll live your entire life inside someone else's narrative and you'll call it safety. They don't need to burn books anymore. They just need to make you too exhausted to read them. They don't need to outlaw opinions. They just need to flood your mind with so much noise, so much fear of saying the wrong thing, that you choose silence over truth. That's not peace, that's submission. And it's happening everywhere. In schools, in boardrooms, in families, in your own mind. The boundaries of acceptable thought are shrinking, and no one has to enforce them because we've been taught to enforce them on ourselves. But here's the hopeful part. The same mechanism that censors you can also liberate you. Because if you have the power to suppress your thoughts, you also have the power to uncover them. You can reverse the process. You can start to notice every time you hesitate, every time you shrink, every time you edit yourself out of fear, that hesitation is your alarm bell. It's a signal telling you that something real is trying to surface. And if you can push past the fear, if you can sit with the discomfort instead of running from it, you'll start to reclaim pieces of yourself you didn't even know were missing. You don't have to shout your truth from the rooftops, but you do have to stop hiding it from yourself. Because every time you censor a thought, you lose a little clarity. And clarity is the foundation of freedom, not comfort, not approval. Clarity. Clarity about what you believe, what you value, what you see. If you lose that, it doesn't matter how free the world around you is, you'll still be in chains. So if you want to fight the thought police, don't look out there. Look in here. Look at the mental scripts you repeat without questioning. Look at the fears that keep you polite but hollow. Look at the silence you mistake for wisdom. Because the revolution doesn't start in the streets. It starts in your sentences. It starts in your thoughts. And it starts the moment you decide that your mind is not their territory. Reclaiming the mind, how to think dangerously and live freely. But to think dangerously is not to be reckless. It's not to provoke for the sake of provocation or to reject every norm just to feel rebellious. To think dangerously is to think independently, to reclaim the mind as your own domain, free from the quiet tyranny of inherited beliefs, social programming, and linguistic traps. But it means refusing to let your thoughts be curated by algorithms, political narratives, or cultural expectations. And in a world where conformity is disguised as virtue, thinking for yourself is the most radical, courageous act you can perform. But let's not romanticize it. This is hard. To think freely is to be lonely at times. It means standing at odds with what's popular, what's trending, what's safe. It means holding beliefs that might make others uncomfortable, even angry. It means asking questions that don't have clear answers, and sometimes no answers at all. It requires the strength to carry ambiguity, the patience to explore contradiction, and the humility to admit when you've been wrong. It's not glamorous, it's gritty. but it's also the only way to live a life that's truly yours. When Orwell gave us 1984, he wasn't just describing a dystopia, but he was offering a mirror. He was showing us what happens when people stop thinking for themselves, when the words they use are not their own, when their values are borrowed, when their emotions are engineered. The tragedy of Winston wasn't just that he was tortured into submission, it was that, by the end, he loved the very thing that controlled him. He believed the lie. And that's what we must resist, not just externally, but within ourselves. So how do you begin reclaiming your mind? The first step is to slow down. The world moves fast on purpose. Speed is a weapon. It keeps you reactive, impulsive, distracted. But reflection is rebellion. Take your time with your thoughts. Sit with your discomfort. Don't rush to resolve it. When you hear a phrase repeated everywhere, do what you love, trust the science, work hard, play hard, pause. Ask, do I know what that really means? Do I agree with it? Or have I just accepted it because it's easier than questioning it? Next, read dangerously. Read things that challenge your worldview, that unsettle you, that make you wrestle with complexity. Don't just consume content that flatters your existing beliefs. Seek out voices that disrupt your comfort zone. Philosophy, literature, history, these aren't entertainment. They're weapons. They sharpen your ability to discern truth from manipulation. They give you language for your intuition, structure for your questions, and context for your reality. Then, speak deliberately. Words are not just sounds, they are commitments. Every time you speak, you reinforce a worldview. So speak with intention. Speak from your own mind, not from scripts you've inherited unconsciously. Refuse to let fear dictate your vocabulary. Refuse to dilute your for the sake of being liked or fitting in. Speaking freely doesn't mean speaking without care, it means speaking from a place of clarity, even if your voice shakes. And finally, live consciously. Don't let your life be the sum of other people's expectations. You don't owe the world your conformity. You owe it your authenticity. That doesn't mean rejecting society, it means engaging with it on your own terms. It means building a life that reflects your actual values, not the ones you were taught to perform. It means creating meaning, not just consuming it. Because here's the deepest truth: they can't control a mind that questions itself. They can't rewrite a vocabulary that's been rewritten by its owner. They can't manipulate a life lived with full presence, full agency, full responsibility. The trick they use to control you, language, fear, conformity, it only works if you let it. But the moment you wake up, the moment you reclaim your thoughts, the spell begins to dissolve. So think dangerously, love dangerously, speak dangerously, live freely. The cage was never locked. You just needed to remember how to walk out.